Hi everyone, let's now formally request for Dhamma talk.
Okay.
Brahmacaloka Dipati Sahampati Katanjalihan Divarakaya Chata Santi Dasatha Parajakajadika Desetu Dhamma Anukampi Mampaja.
Sadhu. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. I'm taking just a moment to scan through the gallery here and see everybody. So many friendly faces. I wish I could all see you in real life. But here we are in the digital world, seeing each other through the Zoom channel. It's certainly acceptable. I figured since this is my first time talking to you, maybe I'd spend some time telling you a little bit about myself so that you can have a better sense of who I am. So I'll tell you a little story about this particular person. So my name is Khemako Bhikkhu. I was ordained in California by Lumpur Pasano, who was a direct disciple of Ajahn Chah. And my ordination was in 2012. And this Vasa, we just finished up the Uposatha observance, full moon. And that was the kind of the 2/3 mark through the Vasa. So this is my 9th Vasa. So I'm starting to get the hang of it, I guess, of being a monk. I haven't been a monk for that long, only 9 years. Before that, and I was ordained at the age of 53, so pretty old in this tradition. It's more common for people to ordain at younger ages. But I'm a slow learner, so it took me a while to figure things out and come to the monk's robe. But along the way, I learned many things that hopefully will be helpful to me as a monk. I was raised in the U.S. So right now I'm living in Canada, here in Tisarna Monastery. And I've been here for 6 years. I was born in the southwestern part of the U.S. in Arizona. And it's very hot and very dry. Living there, now I'm in a place that's very cold and rather wet. So I've come a long way. and I actually like it. Like the weather here better than where I grew up. It suits my body better. I was born and raised in the Catholic tradition, so my background is a Christian background religiously. And I came from a large family. I had 6 brothers and sisters along with my parents, so we had 9 people in my childhood home. And I received my primary education at Catholic schools. So teachers were mostly nuns and priests. And I went to high school and also in Arizona, and then I joined the Army right out of high school, and I was working in military intelligence over in Europe during the latter part of the Cold War in the late 70s and early 80s. When I finished doing that, I came back to the U.S. and went to college, went to university, got a degree in electronics engineering, got hired by a company in California named KLA-Tencor, still there. We make machines that are used in the semiconductor manufacturing industry. And I worked there for about 17 years in that industry at that company. Along the way, I got another degree. I have an MBA, which isn't doing me very much good these days. And I specialized in technology management when I was working at KLA. And I was married. I was also married for 17 years to a wonderful woman who is now living in South Carolina. And she and I divorced sometime in the early part of this century. I don't quite remember. But it was fairly amicable, the divorce, because it was pretty clear that I was going off to become more and more deeply involved in this Buddhist practice. I came in contact with Buddhism about, maybe 1995, 96, somewhere in that era. I was working at my job, living my life there in California. Everything seemed to be going as good as it gets. I had a great job. I was making a lot of money, married to a wonderful person, had a house, had a car. And I felt a nagging discontent. Somehow my life was not fulfilled. And I kept waiting for the fulfillment to come. I had all the fulfilling things. I had acquired all the things that I thought that I wanted, but I didn't actually feel the sense of fulfillment that I kept expecting. So after a while of feeling this sensation, this inner unsatisfiedness with my life, I started looking for answers. Why is it like this? And that's what led me to the Dhamma. I looked in a lot of different places for answers to this question. But mostly I was trying to understand the mechanism of it. Why is it that when we have good things in our life, we have health, we have enough food to eat, we have shelter, we're surrounded by people who are cooperative with us, who harmonize with us, maybe people who even love us. We can have all these good things. We can have friends, we can have family, and still our hearts won't come to rest. Why is that? In my particular case, I thought it was my personal problem. I thought it was I was somehow uniquely defective as a human being, because it seemed as though all the people around me were happy, and I was the only one who was unhappy. It turns out I was wrong about that perception. It was merely the way they were portraying their state, not necessarily the truth. But I didn't understand that at the time. So it seemed like I was doing something wrong. Maybe something I was doing wrong with the way I was thinking about my life. So I spent some time, several years, becoming acquainted with the various versions of Buddhism which are out there. Ajahn Khemako, a very prominent Ajahn in one of the Thai schools who lives down in Southern California, he wrote a book, or is a co-author of a book called The Buddhist Religions, it's a textbook. And he enumerates all the variations on Buddhism that are currently to be found in the world. There's many more than you might think. I thought Christianity had cornered the market on proliferation. There's, I think, several hundred Christian denominations. But apparently Buddhism also has something like that. It has, at least in the upper 50s, numbers of different sects and sub-dominations of Buddhism. And of course, all of them think that they have the real Buddhism, and everybody else has some lesser variant. But in the event, what attracted me the most was the Theravada version of Buddhism. I studied the Mahayana for a while, but I found it not to my taste. Even though I actually first encountered the teachings in a book in Japan, which is, of course, a Mahayana country. So you would think that I would have become a Zen priest rather than a Theravada monk, but despite that introduction, eventually I found my way to the Theravada. And once I started to study it, I realized this is really where my heart felt the most at home, and in this particular set of teachings included in the Theravada canon. So I studied with some lay teachers in California, and after a while I found that the teachings I was receiving seemed kind of repetitive or not progressive, not going anywhere particularly. And I became interested in the what the monastics had to teach. And that's when I first became acquainted with some ordained monastic teachers. A teacher from Burma named Paul Oksaidah attracted me. I went to Burma for a while. I took a temporary ordination there. This was in 2002 or so, 2003 maybe. And that, of course, was a foretaste of what was to come. So once I had that temporary ordination, my sense of the possibility of really devoting my life to this path of practice became a thing. It became something that maybe I could do. So somewhere in that same era, it was apparent to both me and my wife that we were no longer on the same page in terms of what we wanted to do with our lives. So we got a divorce, sold the house, got rid of the car. I took a sabbatical from my job in the year 2001. I think they're still waiting for me to come back. And in 2005, I think it was, I went down to Southern California actually tried to become a monk with Ajahn Khemako Bhikkhu in Southern California at Wat Metta. And Ajahn Jeff was very kind, and he tried to help me, but we weren't a very good fit, sort of interpersonally, for various reasons. I think Ajahn Jeff also thought I was a bit old. By the time I got to him, I was 45, so he felt I was past my prime. And so I gave up on that particular attempt at getting ordained. I did some other things. I did a lot of retreat work. I started a retreat center in Washington State, trying to find a way to fit Buddhism into my life in a more thoroughgoing way without being a monk. But in 2008, I had another opportunity arise to become a steward and a postulant at Abhayagiri in Northern California. And so that's when I made my third attempt. So the first time was in Burma, the second time was in Southern California, the third time was in Northern California, and the third time seems to have kind of taken hold. So like all good Buddhists, I have to do everything 3 times. Can't just do it once. And so after having gotten ordained in California, I spent a couple of years there with Lumpur Pasano and the community there. And in our tradition, in your 3rd year, you go abroad. Like you go kind of student exchange. So you're supposed to go overseas someplace and study at some different monastery so you can get more perspective on how this life is lived. And by that time I had met Lumpur Viradamo. He was a frequent visitor to Abhayagiri in California. And so I had already been to Thailand. I'd spent some time in Thailand visiting Wat Pah Pong and Wat Pah Nanachat and other Ajahn Chah monasteries as part of my general search and investigation of the Theravada. And I kind of understood that Thailand as a place for me to go in my 3rd year abroad would have been rather difficult for me physically because I found the climate quite difficult. So, and I really liked Lumpur Viradamo. He hit it off right away. So I asked him if I could come here for my 3rd year, and he's still waiting for me to leave. So I've been here for 6 years now, and who knows how long it'll last. It'll last maybe a little while longer, we'll see. So that's the big picture, the Ajahn Khemako picture. I hope that helps maybe put things in context a little bit. So I'm a Westerner, and culturally you could say I'm also a Christian or a Catholic, and a technologist, and one of many somewhat overeducated people that populate the West. But like you, I'm a spiritual seeker, but I didn't come to it so much through faith or tradition. I came to it through seeking and practice and questioning and investigation and kind of the process of elimination. I investigated a lot of things before I really settled on the Theravada. So the way that I think about what the Buddha teaches and the way that I relate to it is coming from kind of a unique place, unique for me at least, unique in this culture. I actually have quite a bit of faith. Every year that goes by, my faith in what the Buddha teaches and my devotion and my feeling of appreciation and even love for the Dhamma seems to deepen and broaden. It seems to cover more and more of my life. It's almost like I'm becoming more sincere as time goes by. So for a long time I couldn't really relate to the idea of faith because faith is what Catholicism or Christianity talks about faith a lot. And part of the reason I couldn't carry on as a Christian was because I couldn't understand what they were talking about when they talked about faith. There's this interesting dilemma that appears when you're a Christian, or at least when you're a Catholic. And it works like this. So in order to be a good Catholic, in order to be a good Christian, you have to take Jesus Christ as your personal Savior. You have to put your faith in Christ. But your faith has to be like a kind of a wholehearted acceptance, and it can't be partial. It needs to be thoroughgoing. And I couldn't, I literally couldn't believe this story. I couldn't believe the story the church was telling. As even though I was raised in the church, at a certain point I was very skeptical about their teaching, the idea that there's an omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent creator who created this world that we find ourselves in, created me personally, and then set this whole dynamic in motion where we all seem to suffer a lot. And this suffering seems to be random, sometimes pointless, and difficult, ugly, and sometimes unbearable. And so there's the fundamental question of suffering in the world that Christianity has an answer to, in the sense that suffering is a part of what Christ had to go through in order to redeem us for our sins. So there's this logic in Christianity that addresses suffering, but for me it didn't address it adequately. It seemed to me that if God was making the rules, why did he make this rule that we all have to suffer? I couldn't really understand that. So my faith was very weak. So when I would ask the question, here's where the dilemma comes in. My faith is weak, what do I do? Well, faith comes about through grace. So you have to wait for grace. Well, grace is a gift from God, and you can't do anything to get grace. You just simply have to passively wait for grace to come to you. So, but you can't have grace if you don't have faith in God. So there's this kind of catch-22, as we call it. If you're born into the tradition and you have faith, then you're good to go. You've found your spiritual home. But if you don't have faith, then you can't really stick with it. It's very difficult. So I'd already given up on the idea of faith when I started seeking a solution as an adult to this issue of suffering. And without faith, one has to rely on other spiritual faculties. So faith is a spiritual faculty. It's like discernment, wisdom, concentration, energy. These are all faculties that we have that we can use as part of our spiritual practice. And we're endowed with them. We're endowed with all of them, but we have them in different quantities or ratios, I suppose. So I've met many people who have powerful faith, but their wisdom faculties, not their strong point. And other people who have a tremendous wisdom faculty, but like me, they don't have much faith. Others who have a lot of energy, some that have a lot of concentration. And, we all have to lead with our strength. We don't necessarily have to become strong at something that we're weak at in order to begin the journey. And quite naturally, as we proceed along the spiritual journey, those faculties in us that aren't particularly strong, will tend to rise upward over time, just because we're on the path and we're making progress. So for me, coming to the Buddhist teachings came about because of suffering. I was experiencing this sense of dissatisfaction with my life, and I was looking for an answer to why it's like this. Why do I feel unsatisfied? And I came across the answer, the beginnings of the answer for me, when I first heard or read a clear articulation of the Four Noble Truths. The first noble truth was presented to me like this: human life is characterized by unsatisfactoriness. That's the truth. That's a noble truth. No, that really spoke to me. It actually inspired a certain amount of faith just to hear it stated so clearly and so unambiguously. There's no attempt in that statement to evade suffering or to explain it, to somehow, there's nothing in it that sort of blames the victim or promises some way that it's not true. It's stating it very clearly as the central, most important first noble truth of the Buddha's teaching. And so a teaching that's putting suffering front and center and making it the starting point for spiritual practice simply resonated with my heart. And when I felt that, that's when faith started to arise for me, very authentically for the first time in my life. So when I had that feeling of like, oh, here's somebody who really understands my problem, the Buddha. Then of course I read the second noble truth, and the second noble truth is that the suffering that we experience has this cause, and the cause is clinging or grasping or craving. Various ways of putting it. I didn't really understand that part, I have to admit. It took me a long time to come to a better understanding of it. But since the first part made so much sense to me, I was willing to take the second part on faith. I figured that, okay, he definitely is talking about the thing that I'm most concerned about, and he seems to have something important to say about the causal nature of suffering, that it does have a cause. And anything that has a cause, presumably, there's a way of dealing with that. It's not just mysterious, it's not just random. It's causal. Being an engineer, I like causality, I appreciate causality. I made all my living understanding causality in a physical kind of way. So that also appealed to me. So I found that just as the first two noble truths appealed to me, it appealed to my intellect, and it appealed to my sense of order and my sense of rationality, and it inspired faith. So it was a very powerful moment for me to encounter what the Buddha had to teach. And the third noble truth, very uplifting. It's that when the cause itself has been brought to a halt, then the suffering also comes to a halt. The unsatisfactoriness comes to a halt. So that because of that causal linkage, if you stop the thing which is the causative agent of the phenomena, this suffering, this unsatisfactoriness, then you're also granted the cessation of that unsatisfactoriness, which is, of course, exactly what I wanted. I wanted nothing more than to bring about the end of unsatisfactoriness in my own life. And then the fourth part is also appealing to an engineer. It's just a step-by-step program for how you go about making that happen. So I found it a brilliant exposition on this whole issue, and I've been following the Buddha's teachings as best I can ever since that moment, to greater or lesser degrees as time went by. When I finally got ordained properly with Ajahn Khemako back in 2012, I was sort of it was like getting married or something. I was very ebullient. I was very euphoric for a long time. Really, really happy. I thought, all my problems are solved. But of course, this was only the beginning of a kind of trial by fire. So when many monks go through something like this, you have to kind of give up your old habits and your old ways, and a lot of your old habits and your old ways involve giving up ways of thinking about yourself, your status, your role in society, your future, your ambitions, all the habits that you have about how you do things, how you relate to other people, how you use your time. You have to give it all up. And it's not so apparent when you first approach monasticism. You just sort of see the good things. You see the kind of romantic ideal of being a monk, and you don't see the nitty-gritty and sometimes very painful details that go into bringing about that ideal. So I went through several years of quite difficult struggle to not disrobe, I guess is the way to put it. I kept putting it off. So, okay, it's really, really bad. Maybe it's still like this in 6 months. Maybe I'll reconsider. I'll disrobe that. I'm going to hang in there for 6 more months. So I kept kind of like pushing out my disrobing date. It kept getting farther and farther out. So far, knock on wood, and so far I'm still safe. It seems That hasn't been a problem for a while. I'm more happily contented as a monk now. And this is also part of my faith. This is what brings about faith for me, is that in practicing the Buddha's teachings, first in studying the Buddha's teachings, he emphasizes over and over again, and this, again, appealed to me quite strongly, not to believe what he tells you. That faith alone is not enough. Whereas in Christianity, faith alone is the essential. Faith alone is enough. But in Buddhism, that's not the case. It's not that faith alone by itself might not be adequate for a given person. So a faithful Buddhist who takes the Buddha's teachings on faith and conducts themselves accordingly is going to have a good life. But in order to really fulfill the Buddha's teachings, there's something that you're supposed to do. Right? The Buddha's teaching a path of practice, not merely articles of faith. So the articles of faith can't be the end point. They have to be simply part of the path. Since the Buddha gives us a path of practice, the Eightfold Noble Path, and having the privilege and the opportunity to practice it in this kind of setting, seeing that it actually works, that the Four Noble Truths really are true, of course, inspires even more faith and more willingness to continue practicing. And so that's the alternative to the story that I was living before, when I was working in Silicon Valley and having all the trappings of a successful ordinary life. Is I could see that life could never, it was inherently impossible for that life to ever deliver on this elusive sense of contentment, peace, and satisfaction. That a sense of ease and you could say okayness. That everything's okay, that there's nothing to worry about. There's nothing that needs to happen. Things are fine, just the way they are. Even if they're sort of troubled in one way or another, that in some fundamental way, there's nothing problematic about this existence. So that experience is the experience of the cessation of unsatisfactoriness, the cessation of dukkha. And there's no way that working in Silicon Valley was ever going to give that to me. And I could see that very clearly. So setting off on this direction, putting betting my life, as it were, on the teachings of the Buddha has truly, for me, borne fruit and has justified my faith and inspired further faith. And I'm just telling you about my admiration of the Buddha's teachings. It's quite amazing. So in our tradition, and one has probably mentioned this to you. In our tradition, we're encouraged to not prepare for a Dhamma talk. So you're not supposed to write something out, take notes, come up with a presentation. You're supposed to just speak extemporaneously, and whatever you say is what you say. That's going to have to be good enough. So tonight turned out to be more or less a bio night. The topic that hooked my mind a little bit, though, that I wanted just to say a couple more words about. At the very beginning of the Zoom session, Bita was playing some music and also a little slideshow of Ajahn Chah, some lovely photographs of Ajahn Chah with some quotations. And one quotation that really leapt off the screen for me was this one where he says, "Just because I say something is delicious, you shouldn't believe me. You shouldn't. You can take it on faith that maybe it's true, but don't really believe me until you've tasted the fruit for yourself." That's exactly what I appreciate about the teachings of the Buddha. There's a very famous teaching to the Kamalas, where the Kamalas come to the Buddha and sort of complain about the different views and opinions that they hear from other ascetics and practitioners. And they hear this view from these guys and a different view from those guys, and they both sound very convincing, and who should they believe? And the Buddha gives them a criteria for evaluating truth claims. He says, don't believe something just because it sounds logical, or don't believe something just because you have faith that it's true, or that someone that you respect believes it, or a teacher believes it, or that it's written down in the scriptures. You shouldn't necessarily believe it for that reason either. It's okay to provisionally take it as probably true, maybe, but you shouldn't really believe in it until you've verified it for yourself, that it actually produces the results that you're interested in. And this is, again, appeals to the engineer in me. Ultimately, what makes an engineering truth true is the results that it produces in the real world. So we can say things about magnetic fields having a north and a south, and fields of influence, lines of magnetic force. And we can talk about how lines of magnetic force will affect electrical particles that are within, charged particles within those lines of magnetic force. And it all sounds good on paper, and it all holds together mathematically. But really, the only thing that counts is what can you actually do with it in the real world. And of course, here we are. We've got electric lights, we've got Zoom. It's all because of, not because of faith, it's because of practice. Right? So the technical accomplishment of us being able to relate to each other is a practical accomplishment. Starting with faith, maybe that we can induce things like this, that the teachers are teaching something which is true, but ultimately putting it into practice is what makes it real and what makes it worthwhile. So that quote from Ajahn Chah was particularly germane, particularly relevant to my understanding of Buddhism as well. So I just wanted to share that with you. So I'll leave you with these words tonight as my Dhamma talk. I hope if any of this is helpful for you, then please take it to heart. If it doesn't work for you, then it's okay to set it aside. There'll be more Dhamma talks in the future. Okay? So, adieu.
Thank you, Ajahn. Let's all say 3 sadhus together. Andamayang ovadatata sadhu karang kadamase. Sadhu, sadhu.